Okay, today's discussion is with Jesse Sola, who goes by the name Numina. Throughout the discussion, we talk about his music. If you want to check some of it out ahead of time, you can look at numinamusic.com, which is his primary website. He also has a Bandcamp site. It is numina.bandcamp.com. That's numina.bandcamp.com. If you have a chance, please check out some of that stuff, because we talk about music and music making gear and music making sounds and sound design a lot throughout. So I'll let you have at it. There you go. Okay, today I have a special opportunity to introduce you to a person that I've gotten to know a bit over the years. We actually started communicating a lot because he runs house concerts, and Robert Rich on his recent tour did a house concert at his house. The guy's name is Jesse Sola, but he goes under the artist name of Numina, and it is some fabulous work. I've gotten a chance to spend a little time with his latest release called Through the Gate to Nowhere. And it's a stunning piece of work. It's kind of a dark ambient thing, and it's just beautiful. The whole thing is just amazing. So, explaining how much I love it. But with that, I want to introduce Jesse Sola. Jesse, how are you?
Well, hi. Nice. I'm doing great, and thanks for putting us together. And after that introduction, we could probably just stop there. And
Call it good enough.
Right. No, but yeah, thanks for having me, and be happy to hear to answer some questions, and I look forward to it.
Sure, that's great. So a couple of things. First of all, why don't you fill the readers in on the things that you do artistically? The releases, when you do performances, if you do other kind of sound work.
Sure. Well, I guess, as you mentioned, I'm mostly known for my dark ambient project, Numina, and I've been doing that now since, probably around 97. I never really remember the start year of my project, because I've always been sort of tinkering with synthesizers since I was a child, literally. But between that and some sound design work, those are the two things I guess I'm known for. What got me into synthesizers was not only just I loved the sound of a synthesizer, I loved the tactile touch of a synthesizer and working with them. But my father was a musician, and he was a keyboardist, and he used to bring his Minimoog home after his gigs and set it up right in front of me, and I used to put on my Star Trek pajamas and giant 1970s headphones, and then I just started tweaking away. So I've been kind of working with synthesizers ever since.
That's hilarious. Do you have any pictures? Did your mom take pictures of you with the headphones and the Minimoog?
Man, I sure wish. I mean, my parents were hippies, and there's photo albums, but unfortunately, none of me playing the Minimoog. I sure wish there was, but yeah, that's a fond memory, at least. My father passed away when I was in high school, but to this day, I have that Minimoog still here in the studio. It's been with me since 1976.
Oh, that's amazing. So with that as a start, how did you end up taking it on as your own thing, as your own art?
Sure. So I always always gravitated towards synthesizer-based music. I mean, I liked a lot of different music, but I grew up as a child of the 80s, and I loved 80s synth pop. And I found that, I gravitated towards maybe the more moodier artists of the 80s too. And so, even though I never really played or created my own music in that era, I just always liked synth type music. And it wasn't until I was in college, and I had the Moog, and then I had also a Juno 106 and an SH 101, and I started on my own, just playing stuff, just kind of programming and making sounds, and then I got myself a tape deck, and I found myself a cheap Alesis Quadriverb, and before you know it, I'm multi-tracking on a left and right channel 2 cassette deck, so. Right. So it kind of started out like that, and as time went on, after I got a real job with real money, I was able to kind of expand my studio and kind of go from there.
When you first started doing stuff, were you trying to emulate the synth pop genre, or were you immediately trying to find your own musical voice?
I kind of got influenced into kind of doing the darker ambient music after hearing Hearts of Space and hearing Robert Rich and Steve Roach on there, and then became a really big fan of their work in the late 90s.
Yeah, so it's interesting that that one of the things that was influencing you was Hearts of Space. I can't tell you the number of people that put a marker on that as being like a point where their artistic vision changed. An awful lot of electronic musicians found Hearts of Space to be the mechanism that turned them. So you mentioned Steve Roach and Robert Rich. Who else might have been influences at that time?
Those were like the two main guys, which is kind of funny. And at the same time, I started getting into the Project label, the label that Sam Rosenthal runs.
Right.
And I kind of have a slightly different path than I think a lot of people that are doing what I do, as far as ambient music. I grew up listening to, like, as I mentioned before, the 80s synth pop stuff, and I really liked kind of like goth music and post-punk music and shoegaze music. I was really into music that really enveloped the headspace. And I was never really into anything experimental or anything too fluffy, but you're right. When I hear other people talk about what got them into being an artist or a fan of ambient music, it's always Hearts of Space. And I can remember distinctly back in the late 80s when I was born here in Denver, but I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, of all places. But when we moved back here in the mid 80s, the local public radio station would obviously broadcast Hearts of Space, and
right.
Me and my parents would be out in the car at the store. We'd be pulling up in the driveway, and we'd be like, "Whoa, what is this music?" And we'd all three of us would sit in the car, and we would wait until the end of the show to find out who was playing and stuff. So it was just a headspace thing at that age, and I really connected with it. But I was still so young that I didn't process it in the sense that's what I want to do. I just kind of listened to it as a casual listener.
Well, I think that's kind of interesting, though, because it's a track not unlike mine. I didn't come up through the ranks listening to or being super intrigued by experimental music until I kind of found myself in a position to do it. It was always sort of like the edgier side of pop that was the thing that I, especially when you're 18. That's the kind of stuff that you're going to gravitate towards anyway.
Right.
I don't
anti-establishment.
Yeah, I don't know that many 18-year-olds that were really into Brian Eno, other than just to say it. Now, maybe tastes have changed since then, but
right.
My first interaction with Brian Eno was him doing the Talking Heads albums. That's how I ran into him first. So.
And his work with the Roxy Music, and some of that stuff,
right.
And even. And at my age, it was, his name popped up more with U2,
right.
His work with some of that stuff. And interestingly enough, I love Eno, but I didn't really know of his ambient work that well, other than music for airports, that might have popped up on Hearts of Space or something like that. But it was the Steve Roach Dreamtime Return stuff,
right.
that and the early Robert Rich that just kind of caught me. Even though they're very similar in style, there was something special about those two artists, and I guess I could sort of fall under that path, But
yeah, well, and it almost it makes a sort of sense because the use of minor keys, the use of open space and stuff. There's actually a lot of overlap when you start taking shoegaze or rock and some of these ambient things. There's actually a lot of crossroads there.
There is. Yeah, for sure. It's just obviously they don't use as many synthesizers, but the vibe and the emotion is the same, and that's a great point, and one that people probably don't generally make the connection to. There's a lot of people that are just like guitar shoegaze only, or synth only,
right.
Or you can't mix the two. It's wrong to mix the two.
Right.
But,
yeah.
But for me, I guess growing up, it was all about the headspace and. And when I was in college, being exposed, I have to give a lot of credit to Sam Rosenthal because I think he was his label that brought the kind of ambient that I liked, because I was into the kind of like the shoegazier, gothier side of his stuff. And then when Steve came on board, was like, who's this guy? And I'm like, whoa, this is it, too. And I'd heard Steve prior to that, but I think Project made it a little more accessible at the time. And then throughout college, I was listening to a lot of Steve Roach and Robert Rich and Vida Mana, and then some of the shoegazier stuff like Slowdive and
right.
Lycia.
That was where the world of electronic ambient music was fracturing into a lot of directions. There were the people that were taking things in a very new age direction. There were people that were taking it in this kind of dark and introspective direction. There were people that were basically making instrumental pop tunes, and it was kind of all over the map. What is it like about your personality that drew you to this darker set of releases and artists?
I think some people get kind of scared of that music. It freaks them out. The music I do is somewhat dark, but it's also more soundtracky to me. It's more... Mm-hmm. What I liked was not only just the headspace that music would put you in, but I also liked music that was like the soundtrack to your life, whether it be just driving through the mountains of Colorado or the deserts of Arizona or wherever. That music helped create the soundtrack that I liked, that fit the scenery for me and in my world. As far as it being dark, I guess it's probably just a dark sense. And it's not an evil thing. I don't like evil music, but it's right. There is evil music, out there, but that's one of the things I kind of always sort of resented. Is sometimes people thought the darker edge to dark ambient music did not mean it was, you're into
Satanism, right?
But, yeah.
Last night, one of the things I was doing, I had to drive down to DU to teach and back, and especially in the evening, I had it playing. And night was rolling in, and a big thunderstorm kind of came washing through. And you talk about it being sort of like the soundtrack for your life. It seemed to be the perfect soundtrack for that moment. It was
great.
And so it kind of implies a different kind of darkness. Yeah, it's not an evil darkness as much as just the world sometimes has a dark side to it. And
right.
It's an interesting way. Now, in listening to the music, and I hope that people will take an opportunity to, I know you have a Bandcamp site, right?
I do, yes.
So people can at least stream examples and stuff from that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I hope that people will take the opportunity because I want to talk specifically about some of the sound design you do. Now, frankly, the first release of yours that I ever heard wasn't a music release. It was actually a loop system that you did for Sony as part of their Acid Loop series, right?
I did 4 of them.
You did 4 of them. One of the things I would say about your work is that, and it's interesting because you talk about the first systems that you used being these kind of very analog systems, a Minimoog, a 106, a 101, real super analog stuff. But throughout the time I've heard your music, it's always been a very hybrid thing to me. I never really get a sense, you don't come across as a purist from sort of a sound standpoint. I hear digital things, I hear analog things, I hear, samples and sample manipulation, and you seem to not be overly conservative in any direction. You seem to sort of like embrace it all. What represents sort of like your favorite sound making pieces?
Yeah, you're right. You're very observant about, I guess, my approach. It's sort of, there isn't much structure to the music, and that's generally on purpose. I when I first started out, things were a little more song oriented, I would say. I used a couple different hardware synths with sequencers on them to like literally make it into more of a song-like thing. And then I just started liking the idea of spending a lot of time sound designing with synths, and I'd come up with really cool sounds and process them, and then I'd record maybe a minute of that sound, whether it be looping or modulating over time or whatever, and I'd have all this folder directory of gigs of sound. And what I kind of like now is, and I hate to use this term because it's kind of overused and it's almost cliche now, but it is organic in the way that I kind of approach my music, because I have all this stuff that I program, and then I assemble it, after the fact, rather than, okay, I got a track here, and I'm going to play a lead, and then my second track, even maybe my second track might be a drone. I don't really do it in a rigid way like that, and some might think that that's cheating or whatever, but to me it's all about the final product, how you do it. But
before we go on, I need to
Sure.
query about that a little more, because that's pretty fascinating. So you're saying that what you do is sort of immerse yourself in sound design, and then the process of creating a release is kind of going through your work and choosing things that'll work together and kind of assembling it that way?
75% of it is like that. Yeah. And then once I get maybe like the core element of a song, or the whole album for that matter, because lately I've been doing kind of long form releases, but have index track markers in them, so that, because there are really distinct songs throughout my 70-minute album, but
right.
I'll focus on the core of that album by piecing together sound design work that I've done over the course of a year.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's a really interesting way to go, because, and actually that's kind of interesting for me, because one of the things that I have trouble doing is I really enjoy doing sound design, but when I sit down and say, okay, I'm going to work on a release because, there's pressure for me to do a release, there's something about saying, okay, I'm going to work on a track that makes me do some of the most inane and sad kind of music that ever comes out of me. There's something about saying, I'm making a track that makes me make a horrible track.
It sounds to me like you and I are very similar.
It
probably
does,
in that way. I can't sit down and just make a song like I used to, but and there are a lot of people still like that old version of Numina, that my earlier releases that are more, like I say, more song oriented. There are a lot of people that actually kind of like that, but I just got to doing it this way, and I think part of it might have been because of my opportunity to do those loops with Sony, because doing those loops with Sony forced me into focusing on, even though they're kind of short, but it forced me on sound designing for loops.
Right.
And what I found is that when you do that, in order to make it diverse and interesting so that they can sell it, you got to pull pieces of gear in and out of your studio. It's like modular. Even though it's not a modular in the Euro rack sense, it's modular in the sense that even, a 19-inch rack EMU Planet Earth synth module, I run that through different effects to make a sound that is cool for a loop library.
Right.
So I think then over time, what I started to do was just say, I'm really good at making these soundscapes with one or two synths, but it still wasn't full or fully finished. So I would archive it. When my mind was ready to create the album, then I would go back and go through my list of all these sounds that I had and say, that was really cool, that worked really well. Let's see, I'll put this here and put this here, and then I start to overdub. Maybe 30% of the rest of the project is, overdubbing, and that excludes the mastering, of course. But
right.
And I guess some people have picked up on that process by saying that it doesn't sound as structured when you do it that way. And
right.
I guess that, I don't know if that's good or bad. It's just the way I do it, And one of the things that when people kind of do interviews with me and ask me about stuff is, and I wouldn't say I'm an amateur, but I don't have any rules when I do this. I just do what works for me, and I don't know that much. I know how to run my studio, but I just make sounds that work for me, and spend a lot of time sound designing. And you were going to ask me what sense do I?
What is? If you can give me a rundown of sort of like the things that are your go-to sound making devices.
Well, I have a lot of keyboards. I have to admit, I'm fortunate that I was able to, acquire what I have. I'm kind of a hoarder, I suppose you could say, but a lot of it I earned it because I did make money, a little bit of money on the loop libraries, and actually I needed it in order to make the loop libraries and also just to continue my art. But in the last 5 or 6 years, even though I've gone through a lot of really cool synthesizers, and I really like, there's something I love about every one of them. There's not a bad synth in my book, in my opinion. So people say, I hate this one or I hate this one. I can make a cool sound or find something kind of cool out of almost anything. The Access Virus CI series I think, are still to this day the most powerful, at least for pads. I mean, a soundscape and pad machine out there. And a lot of people think that they're just a rave or trance machine, but I think their strengths are actually more in cinematic and making really cool soundscapes.
Right.
So the Access Virus is probably my number one keyboard for that.
I agree. I think that it's a really underrated synth because it does have kind of this sense that it's a raver boy synth, but man, those filters sound so good and the modulation routings are so interesting. It's really an amazing tool.
It's more than that too. I mean, the mod routing on it is excellent, but what people forget is it's got a whole bunch of wavetables. And it also does granular synthesis, and you can modulate everything in those wavetables and in the modular or in the granular synthesis areas. So you can create some crazy sounds. And for an onboard reverb, it's not half bad. So even though I don't play live really, I might sometime, but it would it's a great standalone synth in that sense too, that you can use the reverbs and the delays on it if you're in a pinch.
You say you don't play live. Now I actually saw you play live one time at
Jim Lamphere. Yeah,
Lamphere. Yeah, it was you opened.
It was Robert Kardi. Do you remember him?
Oh yes, that's it.
And he came out from Salt Lake City, and we sort of had this. And I helped him come out, and I said, "Hey, well, why don't I open up for you?" And he's like, "Okay, sure." So
yeah, it was
really
cool,
I kind of flew by the seat of my pants on that one, but it actually turned out okay.
I thought it turned out great. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I made a homemade CDR limited edition of that and sold out of every single one of them. I made 150 of them, so I can't complain on that one. But
that's great. So the Virus is a big winner. What are some other synths that you tend to go to a lot?
Yeah, I really like the Virus, and lately I picked up a Dave Smith Instruments Pro 2, and I also have his Mono Evolver. I like his gear a lot. Right. I think what he's done is pretty cool. I mean, there's a lot of movement in the sound, and I think he's doing the right thing. It doesn't sound particularly analog-y to me, but he's always had Dave Smith has always been really kind of innovative and all about the future. So I do like that, and I'm also a big fan of the Wave Station. It's kind of hard to ignore the Wave Station.
Well, now the Wave Station though is interesting because everything up to this point that you've mentioned, including the stuff you started with, is a synth full of knobs, right? And the Wave Station was the other thing. I mean, it was the one button, one knob, and a tiny window kind of editing environment. How did you get along with that? And what was sound design like when that was your interface?
Well, it's funny you mention that because you're right. It's kind of notoriously the biggest pain in the ass to program. However, they had three models. They obviously had the keyboard version, and then they had the AD, and then they have the SR, the smaller screen one, the SR. Yeah, I actually, even though everyone complained about programming it, I didn't find it that complicated. I think for me, it got complicated when you wanted to do vector, like a really complicated program that had 4 different combis for vector synthesis. I thought maybe that was overkill anyway, unless you're doing a performance thing.
Right.
But when it came down to just programming the Wave Station, I actually got along with it pretty well, and I used it heavily in my early 2000s work.
Okay.
And even though it's kind of a sense from the 90s, but and even Robert Rich was still using his Wave Station on tour for many, many years. But some of the waveforms do sound a little dated now. But with proper reverb, you pump it through enough reverb, no one can really tell the difference. So.
Right.
But it's a great evolving sounds machine, and people have kind of forgotten about it because there's so much more going on with modular synthesizers, and everybody wants analog, and I get all that. I totally understand that, and it's fun, and but there's still something to be said about some of these digital machines that allows you to really create evolving soundscapes.
Yeah, well, also, I wonder, too, It's you talk about using the wave station in 2000s, even though it was a 19s or a 90s kind of a synth. The one thing I always wonder if we're not too fast to abandon things for the next new shiny object, right? Because one of the things that certainly, well, like the Axis virus that came out early-ish into 2000s, but as you say, it's grown, but also you've grown as a sound designer with it. Something like the Wave Station was a very complex piece of gear, and it's hard to think that, well, everyone tapped its potential in the first 9 months, right? And so I wonder to what extent we aren't too anxious to abandon technology just because a new thing comes along, when in fact there is almost every machine ends up having some unique characteristic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't really know the answer to it. My best guess is probably manufacturers that want to, just be creating and selling stuff. But it's true. Once some of these machines, especially back then, need time to understand them and use them. But it's probably a lot has to do with just the industry.
So you say that you have a lot of keyboards. Is there something that you have that took you a long time to come to appreciate?
I'm pretty easy to please. But I think one I'm still struggling with is a Kawai K5000. It's the additive synthesizer.
Yeah.
It's got its own unique sound for sure, but as you probably are aware, I don't know if you are or not, but it's such a bear to program.
Yeah, I actually had one for a short period of time. That short period of time is the giveaway.
Right. But by the way, I'm also a really big fan of the Waldorf stuff. But one of my first big purchases was a Microwave XT, and I also have a Q and a Pulse, and also a Micro Q. So I've got several of their units, and I've always thought they did a really good job as well with their synths. But yeah, and I also have an Elisa's Andromeda, and I love it. It can be fussy and kind of hard to tune in the right sound, but once you get the right sound, it actually sounds amazing. So
yeah, I had a chance to review that for a magazine, and I remember that I was actually really kind of disappointed with the sound, because it was an analog synth, and I was disappointed with the sound until I just turned off the effects processor, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, there's all of that the great sound that I was looking for. It's unfortunate that they hid this beautiful sound engine behind, some 40-cent effects processing chip or something.
Yeah, totally.
It's pretty bad.
Totally. What is funny though is it's my understanding that the reverb at least the algorithms that are and the design of the reverb that's in the Andromeda is based on the Wedge, and the Wedge is kind of highly regarded as a really budget but high-end or high-quality sounding reverb.
Right.
But what the magic, by the way, for those that may have an Andromeda and aren't sure about it, the real trick to it is turning the oscillator volumes way down. Everybody wants to kind of peg sound, thinking that the louder the better. But I think the real magic to it, even with or without the effects, the magic to the Andromeda is kind of really working and sculpting the sound by not overdriving the circuits.
Oh, sure. Interesting. So I want to talk a little bit more about your sound design work with Sony, just because I've always been curious to talk to someone who's done sort of like high-profile sample stuff. Have you heard much of your own work come back to you, like in commercials or anything like that?
A couple times, yeah, and it was actually really, really great. I'm pretty sure, it's hard to say, it was close, but I heard it on a promo spot for like a murder mystery show. So which is fitting because I do dark ambient music, and then next thing you know, my loop ends up on a murder mystery show.
Right.
And I've had a few people I consider musical colleagues that have said they've used my loops, and I was really flattered and pleased to know that they got something out of it, and I still get a few very, very small royalty checks, so someone's still buying it.
Right. Yeah, that's
after all those
good.
years.
Right. So now, this latest release that you've done has been on a label called Relaxed Machinery.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that label.
Well, it's run by three guys: John Koch from Northrop, Jeff Small, and Steve Brand. All of whom I imagine you've heard their names, but they're kind of they're all artists in their own right, and they've been. I don't know the history kind of verbatim or exactly, but they started it out to have an avenue for ambient artists to release stuff with all the baggage of a contract and worrying about who takes a cut of what. I mean, what's great about these guys is they're all great people, and they basically, with the exception of the art, because they have their own theme, and that makes sense because they want to have an identity. But it's all new. I mean, how you market it, how you press it. I mean, they do a little bit of marketing, but freedom with the music, of course. So it's a great concept, and it was just I don't really shop my music around so much as I have something done, and I kind of wanted to release with these guys because they are all friends, and I've been lucky too to have a release with Hypnos, which obviously have 4 titles.
Okay.
Oh, I forgot, but 4 titles with Hypnos, and they're, to me, Mike and Lena that run Hypnos. Hypnos is like the big name in the scene. Them and Spotted Peccary,
right?
And also the Spotted Peccary release, and I thought this is a great opportunity for me to also work with these guys. So that's kind of how that came to be. They liked it.
Yeah, I'm often curious about it because people now are focusing on self-releasing or not even releasing physical media anymore, just doing digital download releases. But so it was really kind of refreshing to get, a CD with a beautiful, thoughtfully done cover, notes inside, nice backing, the whole thing. It was really it was a real pro thing, and so I wanted to ask you about why you chose to be on label, what kind of label it was. And it's interesting because it seems like an intersection of sort of like the self-management of a self-release, but still kind of getting the alignment that you get as being part of a label. Because like you say, if you say I have a release on Hypnos, that means something to people. Or if you say I have a release in Spotted Peccary, that means that informs people something about what you're doing.
Yeah, you're exactly spot on, and I think that's kind of what those guys were going for. Allowing the artist to have more freedom,
right?
I guess. And why didn't I choose to do it on my own? I could have, I suppose, at this stage. I mean, I thought about just doing a self-release, and I'm probably going to still in the future. But I still want, as far as doing a physical release, I am a hard physical release kind of guy. And I don't begrudge people that want to go the digital route. I totally get it, but I'm also a collector. I'm I'm a music fan, and I'm a music collector in the sense that I've got a pretty large record and CD collection, and I like the physical thing, and I know that there are others out there that do. And I knew I wasn't going to make a lot of money on it, but the good news is I broke even. So if you can break even on some of these things, that is success. I wanted to give that physical thing for people that do like the physical thing as well.
Right.
So,
right.
And I plan on keep doing that as long as I can afford it.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. Well, and it's interesting too because it seems like that aligns with the rest of the things you've kind of revealed to us. You're not a plug-in guy. You're a hardware synthesizer guy. And so it would make sense that you're not a virtual release guy, you're a physical release guy. And I think it's great, but I also think that there's some value to it. I did an interview with Jeff Kaiser, who runs an experimental label, and he says one of the things that's important is that if you want to get people to review or take your work seriously, you almost have to have a physical thing, because if you send them an email saying, here's a release, take a listen, it just gets lost in the great avalanche of email that people get, right? But if you do a
Right.
physical release, it's sitting on their desk. It kind of calls them to take a listen, right? And I think
Oh yeah.
for people who buy things, it also it has that kind of aspect of saying, well, you bought me, let's take a listen, right?
Right. Yeah, and in a way too, just for me, it's just the idea of that. Here's my art that I spent a couple of years on. Someone's able to kind of hold it and at least admire it.
Okay, well, I've used up a lot of your time already. I appreciate you spending the time. I have one more question,
Oh, sure.
which I'm anxious to hear your response to. What does the future represent for you? Where are you going to go in the future? More of the same, or do you have evil plans?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be more of the same. There's sort of a comfort level in doing what I do, and I do want to play live. It's going to be challenging for me because when you're a one man show, and actually I don't even use a computer when I play live, so I'm not sure how that's going to go. But lots of looping and live looping and stuff like that. But what the future holds for me, I don't know. I've got a lot of stuff I've recorded, and I got to sift through it and figure out where it's headed. I think too, since I recently picked up the Dave Smith Pro 2, I might put together a patch bank for it or something like that, which I forgot to mention, by the way. One of the things about the Access virus is I recently released a patch bank for it that I'm selling.
That's fantastic. Do you think you're going to do any more loop library work?
I talked to Sony about it a little bit. I'm not sure. We almost got there, but they kind of shifted gears on me a little bit, so I'm not really sure. I doubt it. But
no, that's too bad.
It was fun, though.
I was
really
a fan.
enjoyed it.
Yeah, no doubt. All right. Well, Jesse, I want to thank you so much for taking the time, for spending the time talking to me this afternoon. And I'm always going to be looking forward to your work. I find it quite fascinating and interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas about how you got there.
Well, thank you so much, and I really do appreciate it, and thanks again.
So there you have it. If you get a chance, please make sure to check out numinamusic.com. That's Numina music.com, or numina.bandcamp.com, or you can follow him on Facebook under the name Numina Music. Thanks a lot again for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this one. I'm sure that you'll enjoy the next few as well. Please keep sticking with us. Make sure you tell your friends, family, enemies, frenemies, everybody. Let them know where we are and how to get us. But otherwise, thanks a lot, and I hope to hear from you soon. You can always touch base with me at ddg@cycling74.com. Otherwise, have a great week.